Okay, I got I think round 5 after, so we're gonna go ahead and get started if everyone's okay with that. Everyone should be seeing my screen. It says Memphis Scipreneur Challenge 2021 on top. Do you know your customers? I don't have videos up, so someone say yes if they see that.
Yes, we can see it.
There's my good double checker Rohan there too, and that for me. I appreciate that. Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining us for week 3. We're going to get started. We have a lot to cover tonight in the hour and a half that we have, so I want to get into it rather rapidly. Tonight, we're going to be talking about problem statements and the framing of such, and we're going to go through as many of those as we can tonight, at least give some examples. I hope to get through all of them. That's the plan. And I can cut into some other time from some other things in order to do that. So we're going to go through all of those unless it just takes too extensively long and we have too much to do. We might have to take things offline. And then we're going to go into customer discovery, which is a critical part of the entire process. And then another critical part with a solution. If you remember back to when we talked about the idea discovery canvas last week, the 3 main sections starting off at the top left-hand corner, the biggest boxes on the entire canvas were problem, customer, and solution. And that's what we've been going over last week and this week. And so these are the most critical points of validating any kind of idea, any problem, any solution, any customer segmentation assumptions, anything you have. They all start off with these 3 things: the problem, solution, customer. If you can't get a lock in with those 3 things to make sure that or each are supporting the other for across all 3, then you're not going to be able to get to value propositions and know what your competition is, because you haven't properly framed the problem and the solution and identified and made assumptions on who your customers were. And we're going to talk about things like assumptions and native bias tonight, and just a general understanding of how to get out of your own way in order to fully validate a product or a solution. As always, if you have questions, Shelby is linked up with me on my chat over here. She'll through text message, she'll just ping me if there's a question. Or Shelby, if you can just say, hey, we have a question here, or if anybody else wants to just ask a question, please go ahead, just call out my name and I'll make a pause to answer the question. Otherwise, we're gonna have a Q&A session towards the tail end. We can discuss things in detail then as well. And then of course we have office hours. Now, no one took advantage of the office hours last week. That's okay. It's kind of expected. First weekend, maybe some assumptions. Hey, this is going to be easy. I know what I need to do. I don't need to visit with office hours, or maybe you hadn't scheduled the time in yet for that week. But I do want to ensure, or to make sure you all understand that, that's Shelby and my time. And it's not that I'm saying, hey, don't waste our time. It's more of don't not waste our time. Don't not use our time. We're there for you to answer questions. I'm not sure how many double negatives I put in there, but you know what I mean. We're there to answer questions. We're there to help you with a problem statement. I got a very good question about problem statements in the mail today. That could have been to something we discussed last week. I was glad that the question was brought up, and I think we provided some valuable information to help them along the way and enough time to get it completed for tonight. But tonight, you're going to have more homework, and it's not just additional homework to what you had last week. It's going to be revamping the problem statement, building a customer segmentation profile, and then going into your solution statement. So you have more homework tonight, and that's just an extension of last week, not plus an extension of last week's homework. So we really need to get to that. Tomorrow we're going to do office hours again, and we'll be available to answer any questions that you may have. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so tonight's agenda, we're going to go over problem framing, a review. We're going to go over a few things from last week. We'll actually discuss the problem statements. I'm going to hand off to each individual team. Someone from that team will need to step up and read out their problem statements. We'll kind of critique it constructively and work on that, and then we'll move forward, and you'll have to make some adjustments after the class for next week. We have to have these 3 things settled and nailed down in a good working fashion by the time we go into next week, so we can stay on the timeline. So it's going to be pretty important. We're going to go into customer identification and customer discovery. These are 2 areas that I spend a lot of time mentoring entrepreneurs on. It's probably one of the most critical points of anything. You can make all sorts of validations when you're sitting at your desk and sitting in your garage with your team, however you want to think of your startup. You can make all sorts of assumptions, I should say, but until you figure out exactly what those customers are and start discovering the customer types and segmentations and how you're going to get past your assumptions and start testing those things out, you are never going to be able to get a product to market. So that customer identification, customer discovery is a critical gatekeeper for you moving forward in a positive fashion, in a successful fashion. We'll go over homework and open up for a little Q&A time permitting, we'll stay a few minutes extra if we need to. But other than that, we'll wrap up the session after the Q&A session. Okay, so we talked about problem framing. This image, I'll leave it up here for a few seconds because this is what we talked about. We kind of talked about how to break down a problem, and we gave you an example of such. It's the typical tried and true way of asking a question about something when you really want to get in depth about what that question is all about. So, you're asking the whys and the whos, the hows, the whats, the wheres, the whens. All these things frame out a statement, both a problem statement and we'll see tonight, for the most part, a solution statement, because the solution statement should match up to the problem statement, obviously, because you're using one to answer the other. So when you ask these questions about why, who, when, how, where, and what, you're getting all the details you need to fully frame that problem in a concise fashion. Now, the word concise is to user's definition. I tend to think of it, and the question that came up today was, should a problem statement be one sentence or should it be a paragraph? And the examples that I'll provide and the examples that I'll discuss, I don't think it's very properly formatted if you try to do it in one sentence, because you're just going to run into a lot of confusion with that sentence itself. So typically it's done with several sentences, with each sentence answering one or two, but not more than those of these questions. And we're going to go through an example of that and show you that here in just a second. Okay. All right, so we discussed this last week. I've condensed it a little bit just for sake of time tonight. We start going with a what. You determine what type of problem you're trying to solve. You look at the existing market. You get on Google or whatever search engine you want to, wherever you want to try to figure out if there's any other problems that are similar out there, and if so, are there solutions? Are there competitors out there? To me, when I look into a competitive environment for a problem that I wish to solve, I get excited almost equally if I see nothing. In fact, I get a few more concerns if I see nothing. A few more hairs on the back of my neck pop up just from experience, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But if I see a competitive market space, I can get equally as excited a lot of times. I mean, if I see a bunch of competitors that are really, really eating each other's lunch, but they're providing for a good set of solutions for a set problem, I move on. That problem's dead to me. And I go out and buy one of those competitive solutions if it answers all my needs. If I feel like I can do it better, sometimes I push forward. But generally, when I see a competitive marketplace, I don't get scared away from that. That truly validates the market. I can utilize information that is discovered through competitive analysis to understand fully what I'm trying to solve. If I've got an idea around a problem and I've got a great solution for that problem, but there's a solution already out there, but I know I can do it better, I'm still off to the races at least a few more cycles to make sure that I can do it better and that it's feasible for me to try to do so from a technological perspective, from a fiscal perspective, from an ethical perspective, a regulatory perspective, a behavioral and psychological perspective, so on and so forth. So as I'm moving through problems and I'm breaking these down through customer discovery and challenging my assumptions and learning more information and doing more research, I only get scared away if I believe that there's some competitors out there that are doing it better than I could ever imagine to do so. Otherwise, I'm still moving forward. So you look for existing problems, you see what's similar, you see if you can do it better. You start to gather that data that you can find from your competitive analysis to start shaping out your problem statement. So then what types of potential customers may benefit from your concept? These are twofold. One is if there's already a competitive market, you can kind of look at who those customers are trying to cater to by looking at their marketing material, by looking at their feature sets, by looking at how their styling even. You can really tell a lot in apps these days and a variety of technologies just from their styling of who they're trying to target, what segmentation, what type of group of individuals are they trying to target. And I'm not going to get into customers right now because we're going to cover that extensively in the next part. The whys. Ask yourself, why do I or others have this problem? You'll see the 5 whys, I think, 3 times in this deck tonight, because I love utilizing the 4-year-old mentality of why the sky is blue. It can be done in a fashion that really pisses people off, so I try not to do that. I don't want to be seen as the 4-year-old just asking why or why or why. So I try to change my way I'm asking those why questions that are leading me to a place, not just blanketly asking why the sky is blue. But I utilize this just to keep asking. We talked about this last week. Keep asking the word why until there's no more whys to ask. That's how many layers of the onion you need to peel away in order to get to the detail that you want. Of course, gather consumer and market feedback, anything you can, and then isolate symptoms from causes. This is the big, I see this a lot. I see this a tremendous amount. A lot of unexperienced entrepreneurs will do this. It's probably the second or third iteration before you start to really understand, being able to detail what are my assumptions versus global truths. What are my native biases as opposed to a market preference? What are my tendencies to make decisions as far as to a large group of people's tendencies to make decisions? And then what are problems and what are symptoms to that problem, right? So you really have to understand that if I'm trying to solve a symptom, I'm never going to be as successful as I could be until I solve the cause. And that's an important distinction, is to be able to isolate the symptoms from the causes. So how, this really deals with me. I describe this as pain. How much pain is the problem causing, and how much relief will your solution, when we get to that section, will your solution provide to the customer? So quantifying the problem's impact, if not solved, identifying possible benefits of solving the problem. And again, asking the 5 whys. So why is it painful? And I always put on my kind of therapist hat and just go, to those therapy type questions of, well, how does that make you feel? When you see this, or when that problem occurs, what do you feel you should be there in order to solve the problem that you're having? Or how does that problem impact your life? Get to the depth of the problem. How much pain is this problem actually solving? From that point, when you're detailing the pain, and in some cases what we're talking about, these are physical pains, literal pains, but even figurative pains. Once you get to the level of depth, then you can start to derive and bring out the value propositions that customer is going to benefit from by utilizing your solution. And once you have the value propositions, then you can match yourself up against your competitive market space. Now, if you start hearing me referring back to the idea discovery canvas in your head, that's where my mentality always keeps coming back to. So as I'm going through my head describing this to you, I'm going through those blocks in the idea discovery canvas. So I have value propositions. I have a better chance of looking at the competitive market space in a kind of one-for-one fashion. I can start looking at the obstacles and building in cost structures and understand what my profit margin could be. These are all critical elements to success. So at this point is a critical point. If I can quantify the pain in some way for these customers, then I can start doing a lot of other things that are going to bring benefit to their lives when I deliver a solution to market. When not everything happens on a set timeline. So you really need to understand when something happens is as critical as anything else. If you're trying to solve a problem that you think is occurring every day in every element, then you're really not solving anything. If you're trying to understand exactly when a situation occurs, maybe it's a set of elements that have to occur, a set of situations that have to occur in a row in order for your problem to occur. But those things are very common in the marketplace of occurring in that way, right? But you have to know that cascading timeline of events in order to understand where the problem really lies and how to fix that. And then where, obviously, physical constraints, literal constraints, figurative constraints, these are all things that apply to the problem equally as the other parts of knowing where this problem occurs. Is it in a certain geographic location as opposed to something else? These are all getting to very good questions about how to segmentate your customer as well. So you have different geographic and demographic considerations we'll discuss that will help you understand if where is actually a circumstance that you need to take care of. Okay, so I want to go through this example, and I've highlighted the areas that we've talked about. So I'm going to read this and bring out the areas. So if you utilize this as an example for your problem statement, this should have helped you properly frame and structure your problem statement to the point where it is this concise. To me, this is the definition of concise. I'm going to read it out loud. Townsville General Hospital, which is the where, operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's not the when. As such, patients' needs must be addressed all around the clock. So we have a general problem statement of where the problem is. It's at the hospital, it's with patients, and they're having things that aren't being addressed around the clock, especially for when and who. For the overnight shift, that's the when and who, there are currently no cardiology technologists scheduled. That's the what, that we need, which can create issues for emergency staff, also a who. Some patients wait for 4 hours or more for medical laboratory assistant to administer an electrocardiogram, a task better suited for a cardiology technologist to perform and interpret. The results in poorer patient care and worse health outcomes. The why. The hospital should always have a cardiology technology available, and that's how you're going to solve this. That's the problem that you've established, and this is the solution. Now, it's not the solution as far as, oh, we can simply hire another cardiology technologist. Now, that's not always going to be the case. You can't have that person working 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're going to have to hire staff. You're going to have to do that. There's all sorts of things for the implementation of the solution. This is not the solution. This is merely stating what the simplistic fix for the problem is, right? So this is how the problem is going to be fixed. It's not the solution. So given that this is a good example of a problem statement in a very concise and well-formatted fashion, I'd like to go through and hear other people's examples of their problem statement. So I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment so I can see everybody's smiling faces. So who would like to go first, no matter what team you're on, and read us your problem statement? Come off mute, raise your hand if you're on video, come off video if you're not.
Hey, can I go in?
Yeah, Christina. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, y'all. I'm Christina. Me and my team are tackling the glioblastoma multiform. So I just have like a couple sentences, but in your problem framing, you mentioned the solution, but the problem statement itself, does that incorporate a potential solution?
It incorporates a solution, but not the solution, right? I like to see that in there because that actually kind of acts as a literal segue in talking about more depth about the customers and more depth about the solution. I just want to make sure that we're clear, like you bring it up, and I appreciate you bringing it up, that this is not the solution, it's a solution to the problem. When you start breaking this down, it might not be the only solution to the problem. It might not even be the best solution to the problem. So there's all sorts of ways of thinking about it to break it down to the actual solution that you're going to bring to market.
Okay. All right. So in my problem statement thus far, I've only stated out the problem. So I think that will be, I'll get criticized for that. But I'm just explaining the condition in layman's terms. Glioblastoma multiforme, GBM, is an aggressive brain tumor that is unresponsive to current therapeutic treatment. Consequently, GBM patients have an average lifespan of 2 years. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. I mean, you definitely got the what and the who. The when, that's not something that has to necessarily be there every single time, but it's when a patient has this set of issues, that's when the problem is presented, right? Is the problem presented just the illness, the syndrome, the disease, or is it with certain situations that occur because of that situation, that syndrome, that disease, or anything else that caused the problem that we're trying to do? And that can be a win as well. There's a lot of research on just treatment plans and everything else, and how it doesn't, obviously there's a lot of different outcomes that affect that treatment at different times. So I think you have the start of a good problem statement. I think you need to dig a little bit deeper on some of the other questions of asking, what is the possible fix without actually going into what the solution actually will be. Is the fix a new treatment, a new process? Is it bringing in more people to the problem? So we need to kind of figure out exactly what the problem is and what we're trying to solve of that problem. Not necessarily how we're going to solve it. That kind of comes in a blanket statement at the end, but truly, what is needed to solve that problem, not the solution itself, just the kind of overarching statement. Okay, I think we can work on it a little bit more and add a few more things. So I'd like you to take another pass at it and assign it for office hours tomorrow if you want to work it with Shelby and I. on problem statements. I think it'd be a great use of your time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Who else wants to go?
Hey, Brian. Hi. This is Pandurang.
Hey,
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Yeah. Let me. I will go through our problem statement.
Okay.
And yeah. So our one sentence statement is this: our company aims to provide scalable and cost-effective solutions with high sensitivity and specificity in DNA deep sequencing that is caused by the tumor, that is used by the tumor liquid biopsy industry, drug resistance management in infectious diseases and beyond. So this is one sentence statement. And in detail, it's like this. Deep sequencing is the foundation method for detecting minuscule amounts of mutation in a given sample. Therefore, it's frequently used in tumor early detection in plasma samples known as cancer liquid biopsy. However, it is well known that DNA sequencing has a non-negligible error rate that could confound the real mutation detection. The current methods employ DNA-based barcoding protocols followed by deep sequencing and subsequent bioinformatics approaches for the detection of ultra-low frequency cancer mutations in blood samples. However, mathematical modeling shows that the barcoding method is unlikely to uniformly cover the whole human genome. Therefore, there is desire to systematically reduce error rate in deep sequencing to enhance sensitivity and specificity of cancer liquid biopsy. We provide novel methods, clean DeepSeq and sequencer, to computationally suppress the current NGS error rate 2 orders of magnitude lower than the general reports, which enables broad applications of current NGS methods to detect variants with frequency as low as 0.1%. We envision that our primary consumers would be those companies
All right, I'm gonna stop you right there because first of all, I don't quite know where I kind of drew the line there. But you went into the solution to the problem right after one of the better problem statements I've heard this early on in a process of education. So kudos to you and your team. I think that was a really solid problem statement. I heard a lot of responses to the whens, the whats, the whys, and the hows, and what is currently being done that is insufficient in that regard. So I think your problem statement was really well locked in, and when I say concise, a definition of concise, there's no number of word count that makes something concise. If you're utilizing the fewest amount of words to get your message across, so where clearly anyone just about can understand the problem, then you've nailed it. If it's 500 words, okay, so be it. If it's 50 words, great. But so I thought the problem statement was good. It's when you started going into the details of the solution that I wanted to stop you, mostly because you've probably already written your solution statement too, and those are two separate things. So kudos to you on the problem statement. I hope everybody was listening pretty clearly. I think it was a very well formatted one, and I think it's certainly something you can build upon.
Thanks a lot for the feedback. Yep.
Hey, Brad, you asked to go next, so turn your mic on and take it.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Ride.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can.
Yeah, so ours, we started, you can be kind of broad with it, but we nailed it down to 11 words, but it's essentially human wounds need to be covered to heal and prevent infection. And I'll read it again, added those words you had. Human who, wounds what, need to be covered how to heal and prevent infection, why?
Okay. That is one of the most concise problem statements I think I've heard, and I've heard some short ones. So that's good, but I don't think it's got enough of the detail that we need. Okay. So say it one more time for me.
Human wounds need to be covered in order to heal and prevent infection.
Yeah, I agree. How's that? So a Band-Aid would be a solution.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So I guess you could dive into deeper, like, so the IP that U of M has and Dr. Jennings, Dr. Haggard have is on chitosan solutions that are really specific for wounds that may have with patients with complications, comorbidities, diabetes, type 2 hypertension, and like Sweet Bio is basically a competitor to us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you should put some of that stuff in there. I mean, I think you need to differentiate between a blanket general statement that is very concise to and I appreciate what you did though. I mean, I really do. I think your goal was to try to use as few terms and words as possible to describe a problem. And I think that's correct. I think you should because of what I said for the last one, which is, remember, you're utilizing, so as just a side comment, you're going to be utilizing this problem statement, the customer data that we're talking about, and the solution statement all in your pitch, right? And so if you're pitching to 45 people and 5 of them are scientists at St. Jude and 40 of them are like me, you know, you're going to have to speak to both of us, right? So that's the thing is you got to be concise. So you're going to capture the lay people like myself, but you also have to be detailed enough so where that the investors that are investing in biomed, they understand where you're working at. So I think where you need to work with your team and add some things to do is some of the context, right? It's a little bit more of the what we're talking about and the where. So in certain situations with comorbidities and different underlying issues, wound care can cause ongoing infection due to few products in the marketplace that respond directly to that situation, right? And then and I didn't go into a solution. I merely pointed out where the problem was. I merely pointed out where the gap was. So now as a listener, I'd be able to understand that, okay, you're looking at wound care. We're not talking about Band-Aids because that's already been done. We're talking about specific situations of a patient that cause wounds to not heal properly with open market or current market solutions for wound care. And in the organic market of wound care, like Sweet Bio and Kaizen and all the things you're talking about, are a new market with readily replenishable materials, cheaply manufactured, so on and so forth. Again, I'm going into a solution right then when I started talking on those last things, but I still needed to kind of set up the problem in a way to give the context.
I guess my thoughts are like, I like to try to get broad first because it's easier to narrow it from being broad than to go backwards from being really specific and try to back yourself up and like capture more customers or capture a bigger market or capture like, you know, if you're too narrow and no one wants to pay to or invest in you to solve that problem, like you might not end up with anything, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
To add than to carve away. If you start off with a big, huge, large blanket statement full of paragraphs of information, it's difficult to get it down to less than 100 words. If you start off with 11, you have plenty of room to add, right? And you're already starting off kind of on a diet of words, as I would put it. So I think you're in good shape. I think you need to add more context with your team. And I think that's a good time to do that after hours and work on that. And just a note to the office hours. Good. Thanks, Brad. You know, just a side note to the office hours. If office hours don't work out for you, and I want to say, I'll say this every week, then reach out to us and we will set up different times to work with you. Shelby and I work, I mean, we're entrepreneurs at heart. So we work 12, 14 hours a day. If we need to meet at a certain time that's a little bit better to you, I mean, obviously we have our lives to live as well, we'll do that. So if tomorrow's not a good time, or you just want to do it through email and keep it all electronic, that's all fine too. Just don't, waste the opportunity. Okay, who else wants to read out their problem statement? I'd like to do at least one more, if not a couple more, or all of them.
I can go for team 6.
Okay, great.
Lack of prone play or tummy time can negatively affect motor development and cause flat spots on the heads of infants. Though many parents are aware of tummy time recommendations, they choose not to position infants due to their resistance to this position. The tummy time mat helps infants spend playtime at home in the prone position and develop the necessary muscles to improve motor development and prevent the formation of these flat spots.
Right questions to be asked, right? It was a well-framed problem statement that covered all the right points. So, I mean, from here, you can start breaking it down and looking at what we'll talk about next, which is customer segmentations, because you kind of already isolated a general area of market. And same with the ones before this, right? So, I mean, we'll talk about this in more detail, but you have parents of children between the ages of 0 and 12 months, right? I mean, so you know what you're talking about now. It's boy, girl, doesn't matter, and so but it could also have various circumstances, fontanelles, whatever it is that are not forming properly, you name it, you know it better than I do. But those things are things that you can start breaking down into more detail from the statement that you made. So I thought that was good. Good job.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Who else? Okay, I think those were maybe five good examples of what we, and I know one team is still getting kind of getting all the information they need to understand their IP. So they're a little bit behind. We'll get them caught up. Another reason to do office hours. But I really appreciate everyone's effort. I thought all of them had the makings of being a very good problem statement. I think a couple of them, which we talked about, just need to be pulled out a little bit more, looking at the questions at hand. Maybe this deck will help you. Last week's deck will help you. We're going to put this up in the Google Share, and this will be up on YouTube as well. Refer back to it and try to expand and pull out more detail and more context in your problem statement without sacrificing it being concise to a point that's easily explainable. If you're thinking about how you're going to start pitching these things, when we talk about this a little bit in the future, one thing that you're going to have to do is the elevator pitch, right? An elevator pitch by definition, although never completely like this, is 60 seconds. Or another way of thinking about it, if you were on the bottom floor with the person that was going to have $1 million to give you, and he was up on the 12th floor, she's on the 12th floor, you have those 60 seconds to get from the first floor to the 12th floor to explain exactly your detail, because that person is walking off the elevator and is never going to look back at you again unless you have really piqued her interest or their interest on what the idea is. So thinking along those lines, this is also a reason why we try to get down to these very concise problem and solution statements, so we can build a pitch, so we can build a narrative. This problem statement will be the first thing that you present when you start doing your pitching, because you want to set the stage of what the problem is. Next, you're going to set how big the stage is by talking about customers. And then you're going to talk about how you're going to make that whole solution fit into the entire problem space for all those customers. And then you start talking about the other things from there. So, this in part will become part of your elevator pitch, because you have to start off with a problem. Okay. Good job, everybody. Okay, who is your customer? We're going to move right on. If you have questions, put them in the chat. Shelby will capture them, hold them to the last. Come to office hours tomorrow. We'll answer those, but I want to move on for the time that we have. So who is your customer? That's going to be a critical question that you're going to have to answer. Obviously, there's no point in building a solution for a problem if you have no customers to sell it to. And is it really a problem if there's no one complaining about it? It's like a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it. Does it really, did it really fall? Well, yeah, it did. But anyway, you get my point. All right, customer segmentation. All right, this is a good image. This is what we're going to try to do here. We're going to try to figure out what the massive group of people are, and then isolate out a group of individuals that are best for what we're doing. Hang on a second. I don't think I'm sharing. Okay. Do this one more time. Just bear with me for, at least y'all aren't a bunch of kindergartners like some of my teaching colleagues that I talk with on a weekly basis about all this technology. At least I can ask y'all to be patient, and y'all will. I appreciate that. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's go back one slide. Everybody see my screen again? Rohan, give me a thumbs up. Thank you. Okay, so who is your customer? All right, so you got to see the slide, so I didn't waste my time. All right, so you got the customer segmentation. And so this picture is kind of a good explanation of what we're talking about here. You have the large group of individuals that make up the total pie, and we're trying to figure out what slice of that pie we're going to go after. If you think back to what we were talking about last week about total addressable market, this is a good example of what that could be. This larger set of 3/4 of pie here That's the total addressable market. In fact, actually all 4 parts of that, I should correct myself, all 4 parts of that is total addressable market. But when we go down to the serviceable market and what we can feasible, what's feasible for us to penetrate, it's going to be a very small section of that. And I asked this question a lot for a lot of different things, but I think it's a fun question to ask. It's like, do you want a big piece of a small pie or a small piece of a big pie? I ask that all the time of founders when they're taking on investment, when they're talking about new markets, they're going to cost them more money and it's going to hit their bottom line, so on and so forth. If you want to be very small and have a very niche market with a very small clientele that you cater to very, very well, and they pay you every single time and you have very little competition in that space, a big piece of a small pie is amazing. But I will always defend the other side of that and say odds are better that a small pie piece of a much bigger pie is always going to be more lucrative than a big piece of a small pie. So this is why I utilize this image here. Okay, so segmentation. Basically, segmentation is dividing similar customers into homogeneous groups that sit for the sake of classification and study. We're going to actually be speaking in terms that are going to resonate with most everyone on the call tonight. So it's really nice to have an audience that's scientific or at least research oriented. A good understanding of what we're talking about will be based in this. And segmentation is doing something very similar to that. You do that when you're talking about analytical research. You start breaking things down in chunks. You start dividing and conquering on the research for each piece. You see how they fit, all the constraints, all the prerequisites and requisites, so on and so forth. And you're breaking those down into groups, right? And so you're breaking customers down in groups as well, these homogeneous groups that you can start looking into and start classifying those further and further in detail in order to understand which ones are your true target markets. And then better yet, understanding what your true target market was expecting of your solution and how they are impacted. Remember, going back to the pain point of the problem that they're suffering from. So that's what segmentation is. And customer discovery first starts off with properly segmenting your customer base. Okay. So there's some consideration for segmentation. We'll go through all of these. Geographic, that's pretty self-explanatory, but let's walk through it just briefly. Customers are grouped based on location. It's a simple way of saying it, but you have domestic and you have foreign, and that is the same for every country. Every country has domestic and foreign. Every person on the planet has a domestic partner and a foreign counterpart. It's just the way we work. We're not one big common state. So by geography is certainly something that needs to be considered. And you can even have subgroups inside the geography. So thinking of the United States, you have the South, you have the West, you have the East, you have the North, you have California. Then even further inside of the South, you have the Deep South. Then you have Florida, completely different than the South, but it's in the South, right? Then you have Texas, also completely different than a lot of the South, but it's in the South. Then you have the West Coast, but California is different than Portland and Oregon. I mean, so you can see how you can break this down further and further and further and further. And not each geographic location is going to give you one specific answer to your question. So you really need to look at a large swath of geographic areas and make sure the markets that you're looking at are the ones that best match up to your solution that you're trying to offer. The next most important one is demographic. I mean, this is breaking it down. And today I'm so happy to see that our demographics and ethnographics research is actually growing by leaps and bounds because we actually have more definitions of what our demographics. So certainly you're talking about ethnicity, you're talking about gender and age, marital status, education, religion, you name it, culture, different things as it relates to demographics of an individual, sexual orientation. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. These are the facets that make up a human, and a human is a customer, and a customer is something who's going to pay you for your product. So understanding what their markers are and their drivers are and their motivations, abilities, and triggers based on their demographics is very, very important. So going back to the one earlier, if I'm talking about parents between the age, parents of children between the ages of 0 and 12, that is me breaking things down by demographic, right? I don't have gender in there because it doesn't matter. I do have age in there. I do have marital status, but it doesn't, but that would be isolating all the single parents out there. So I don't want to think of marital status. So they don't have to be married. And they don't have to actually be biological parents, so we don't want to get too detailed because it's not adoptive versus others. There's orphanages and all sorts of things. These are all commonplace for the problem. So truly, it's really about the child, boy or girl, 0 to 12 months, right? Not even the parent, right? So that's how you got to break this thing down. Now, is a child 0 to 12 going to pay for it? No. So do you have to think about ways to sell to the parent? Absolutely. So, I mean, you can't lose sight of the fact of who the consumer is, in this case, the small infant baby, and who the customer is. But there's also another element, because will this be reimbursable through insurance? Right. So there's that classification. Is it going to be carried by another vendor? So these are all customers or business partners that you have to properly kind of classify in order to understand properly how to work with these individuals. So the next one, behavioral, all sorts of things there related to that. Customers grouped by the native or learned preferences, their tendencies, their buying behavior. So there's a lot of things that go along with that. And you can start seeing, as we progress down these groups, how they work with and for, and even in some cases, in many cases, against another classification and segmentation. So when I say considerations, you have to go through all of these in order to understand which ones are the most valuable, which ones are problems, and which ones are causes, or symptoms rather, and which one makes the most sense for you. This next one, firmographic, it's not a word that's thrown around a lot because it's made up basically, but not by me, by my industry. Same as demographic, yet it focuses on organizations, not individuals. Think B2B here, right? If I'm going to sell SAP or software as a service type process, and I'm SAP, I'm selling to big, huge companies like FedEx and Dell and all these things. That's a business to a business situation. So I'm going to think of FedEx as a holistic customer, even though it's an organization of people. Psychographic, not to be confused with other psychedelic type things, but intersection of behavioral tendencies and core beliefs, right? So these are, we're talking about your behaviors, your tendencies that are related to just your behavior and what you do on a daily basis. These are your innate kind of core beliefs. These are your belief system and the tendencies that derive from that belief system. And then SMART, this one is new. It's a combination from the above. So when we start combining customers and we start building a better customer profile, and we start to realize that it's not just one, it's multifaceted, and each one of those components needs to be taken into consideration when we're building out our solution, our value proposition. That's when we start getting into smart segmentation, because we're actually grouping a few things together. And these individuals that we're identifying as a set customer, which is important to understand. What I'm saying is, it's not saying that we have a bunch of different customers put together for no reason. What we're doing is kind of coming up with a super customer, right? Which might be represented by millions of people, but they combine a few things of these other segmentations considerations. So there essentially is, I'm not sure I like the word, but it's what we use in the industry, but they're smart. Again, I don't like the word. All right, so let's talk about segmentation types. Mass market. And I've said this analogy before, this statement before: if you're building something for everyone, you're building something for no one. If we all had superpowers, there'd be no super people, or superheroes. It's kind of the same thing, right? So mass market doesn't mean global market, although you hear that term in the global economy, but there's very few products that are sold to every person on the face of the planet, for a variety of reasons. But mass market does mean a large segmentation. A lot of social media, they are definitely mass market because they're catering to billions and billions of daily active users every single day. Food services, McDonald's, different things, certainly mass market. FedEx, mass market, because they work in a global fashion. All these are large scale mass market, and they don't really differentiate between smaller groups of individuals because they sell a mass product. Niche, we cater to a specific specialized customer segments. Going back to the helmet that you wear to help, or the mat that you lay on to help you turn, so on and so forth, for the baby's heads. That's a very niche market. It does not happen to every child, but it happens to a significant enough a child that it's certainly a market, but that's going to be a niche, right? Segmented, a model that distinguishes between segments with slightly different needs and problems. So I can segment my groupings, but those groupings of people have some sort of relationship between each other that makes them common. There's only slightly differences between the two. And that's opposed to diversified, which is where I'll have different segmentations all together, right? I'm looking at, for banks, and money market managers and different things like that. I'm going to be both marketing to the super, wealthy individuals, but I'm also going to market down to the day traders and the people on the individual levels that are just going to be making small transactions. So I have to cater to both. So they're both sides of it. So they're somewhat different, but they have similar needs. So those are segmented and diversified. Multi-sided. I actually had my last business with a multi-sided business. because I was selling to real estate agents that were then selling my product to buyers and sellers of homes, right? So it was kind of a multifaceted group. It's two or more interdependent customer segments. Think of credit cards, right? You need merchants for credit cards, and you need people like us to put credit cards in our wallet. And if we take our credit card out of our wallet and put it in a point of sale device, that merchant now then transacts for 2.99% for the credit card company and for the bank. And you see that's all a multi-sided facet. The credit card holder and the merchant are only related by the transaction, right? But the credit card company itself, the Visa and everything else, they have to have multi-sided customers in order to have their revenue stream coming in. Okay, so these are the segmentation types as they were. I'm going to keep moving on because I want to stay on time. But again, if you have any questions, throw your hand up into the chat or the participation window, which I have open, and I'll see you and come to you. Okay, let me just expand this a little bit so I see everybody. Okay, so moving on. I do like this dude. You might see this guy in every one of my slide decks. For some reason, he just calls out to me every single time. All right. So again, in context of who we're talking to, this should be a fairly easy statement to make, to be your inner scientist. When we go into customer discovery, we just talked about segmentation and understanding what types of customers there are and how to identify those and how to classify those, how to categorize those, how to understand how they fit into your problem, so on and so forth. What we need to do now is to kind of understand how we're going to go talk to those customers and why. I teach customer discovery over a full semester, or I have at times. It's certainly I spend a lot of time with. So I'm not going to be covering the week's worth of material that I would normally cover in a customer discovery, but I am going to cover the most important elements of customer discovery. And I think you can do a little legwork on your own to Google some things on that. But I think you'll get enough of it from this that will help you with your homework, and you'll be able to bring back some compelling information for next week. So one thing is to be your inner scientist, channel your inner researcher. All right, so the customer discovery method, and this is where you should start seeing some very similar words: observation, hypothesis, experimentation. I mean, even if you've taken 8th grade chemistry, you know what these words are, right? So we're going to be starting off with observing simply and defining a phenomenon or a problem or a market need. We're going to develop theories and the hypothesis about a solution to the problem and the problem itself. And then we're going to conduct experiments to test the hypothesis, and getting out of the building, feet on the street, is the only way to do that. So like I said, this should resonate. This is what it's probably one of the things I love to do the most as an entrepreneur. This goes back to, me saying very early on that I'm the guy who talks to anybody and everybody on the elevator, in the line, to getting coffee, you name it. But it's because I'm so naturally biased to finding out information about problems in the marketplace, because I'm always looking for ideas, either to help other people that I'm working with or for my own needs, that I just do a lot of observational research. And then that observational research turns into very dedicated and diligent kind of face-to-face research to gather data. And usually that is the best way for me to figure out going beyond my sitting at my desk and doing basic research on Google. But I always build my theories about what I'm looking for. I always write down all of my assumptions, every one I could possibly think of that I could make. And then I go about building a hypothesis or a set of hypotheses about my problem, about my customer, and about my solution, depending on where I'm on in the process. And the next thing I know, I'm out there conducting experiments because I'm asking people questions about that situation, those scenarios, and asking them, my inner therapist, how does that make you feel, right? So that's a big part of the customer discovery method. So let's talk about the process. The first thing you want to do is form a hypothesis that defines both the problem and the solution you're trying to propose. You might be early on, and this is the normal process that I teach, but you can break this down. And I just said this in the last slide. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to wait to do customer discovery and customer interview when I'm done with the problem and I understand the customer and I understand the solution. Me personally, I'll go out after I've discovered the problem and kind of validated my problem statement and start asking people. And my process is always the same. I ask the people I know. All right. But I always discount and wait. Like if I ask my father any question about any problem idea that I've ever had, he's always said, my God, that's a great idea. You're going to do great on that, because he's my dad. He's always patting me on the back. And later in my years, I told him, I was like, you got to stop just telling me what you think I want to hear. I need your straight feedback. So, you want to talk to your family member first, but usually it's just really, that's for me. I'm getting the questions in my head. I'm properly formatting my hypotheses. I'm trying to figure out exactly what I'm going to go talk to perfect strangers about. That next iteration. So let's say I talk to 4 or 5 family members. I'll go talk to 10 to 12 to 15 of friends, people I know, either know very, very well at the beginning, and people I don't know maybe very well, or friends of friends that I might not know very well. Again, I'm trying to figure out where I'm wrong. I'm trying to figure out what assumptions I made that are right and what assumptions that I made that are wrong. And then I'll continue doing, Shelby can attest to this. I'll talk to 100 people inside of 4 weeks just to figure out if I'm going to do something. Right. And if I hear 2 people say, you got a great idea, I don't have a great idea. Right. One of those is my dad. If I talk to 20 people and they say, well, I think I have that problem, but how about this? And then I form it and I start talking to more and more and more and more. If I'm getting to 30, 40% of 100 people, so 30 to 40 people that give me 80% of what I need to validate my idea, those, may not be the most statistically sampled numbers I just gave you, but the fact of the matter is you're talking about, if I took just a way of thinking of it as 100 customers and 30 of them had the same problem, and of those 30, 15 of them said, hey, I think I'd buy that solution, then I've got, the half of my addressable market saying they're going to buy my solution. Right. So at that point, I know I'm onto something, and I keep going and going and going, and I'll talk to thousands of people before we even put a product in the market. My wife, who is my co-founder in my last business, she loves to strap on the sandwich boards that have open-ended questions and she walked through downtown San Francisco for about 4 hours, just, otherwise looking kind of foolish to most people. To me, I was loving all the feedback we're getting. And she got many people coming up to her saying, yeah, I'm about to buy a home. I'll talk to you for 5 minutes or 30 seconds or whatever it is. And she's off to the races. And half those people she talked to for 15, 20 minutes just to get the information she needed to kind of help her further define her hypothesis. I got a little off the track there, but you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so you form the hypothesis for your problem, solutions, customers, and the price. All right, define your assumptions. We talked about this earlier. I go down on a piece of paper and my team goes down with me, and we write down every assumption we could possibly make, no matter how silly it might seem. We write down all of our assumptions, because what we're doing is writing down our own personal perspectives. We're addressing our own native biases. We're getting a full understanding of all the things that could be in the way of getting to a true solution for a true problem that's not just our problem and our solution the way we want it, right? So I have to understand how to isolate all of my native bias from the global truths, right? And the global truths here obviously aren't the entire planet, but we're talking about a market, a group of individuals. Those are the truths. The truths are beyond what's just in your head, right? So you have to figure out the best way to get yourself out of the way. The problem you address is actually a problem. The solution you propose will actually solve a problem. The market you plan to target has the problem, and the market you plan to target will be willing to pay you for that solution. Those are the assumptions that you can make, but you have to verify and validate each one of those and vet them out in order to understand if they're going to be, true to the word, and have you build a solution that is going to be something that people want to buy. I always create customer personas. We're not going to talk about that in too much detail, because there's lots of examples online, and customer journeys, also lots of examples online. So in brief terms, what I like to do is build personas. So I won't use the baby one again, but let's use, wound care. A typical customer persona will include the considerations we talked about earlier, the demographics, the geographics, all the different considerations to take. It will isolate the types of customers that are typical users of our solution, or would be, based on the fact that they have a similar issue or problem. Are they male, female? Are they younger, older? Are they multi-segmented? So it is all athletes of certain age groups? Is it certain types of athletes? Is it certain types of lacerations for wound care? Is it internally applied for wound care? Is it externally applied for wound care? Can it do both? What are the other things that are needed in order to seal the wound so that whatever is being utilized to stave off infection is actually working, so on and so forth. But you have to figure out where all the facets are of the customer that you're trying to identify by building a persona. This will be an example of your most typical customer. And it's going to be important for you to do this in order for you to build a narrative of who your customer is. When you go to your pitch, you'll talk about your problem, and then inevitably you'll talk about Jeff just cut his leg, so on and so forth, right? To give some sort of example. Don't use Jeff, use someone else, or don't use anybody at all. Just talk about an example. But my point being there is that Jeff in this regard would represent the ideal customer or the customer situation that would best utilize your problem and benefit from your solution. So a persona is a simple one-page little document that describes all the considerations we talked about earlier to define your typical target customer. A customer journey is also a really, really strong, well-used tool in our industry, especially with entrepreneurs. And you can think about it, the key word there is journey. It's a map that illustrates how a customer fits into your hypothesis and the expected experiences that they will be involved in. So if you can imagine a customer going through the process, a mother having a child with issues and formation of their brain, the skull, and so on and forth. And what do? Do they talk to these individuals? They go to their doctor, they get online, they see this, that, and the other. I mean, you got to kind of describe the entire journey, both bad and good, of what the customer is going through right now, which should be very painful. Hopefully not literally, but the idea should be that it's painful to them for some reason. And then you can show a journey of how your solution allows them to not feel so much pain, both figuratively and literally. So that journey will help you along the way. The journey map is not something we're going to do in this program, but it is something for you to take away as a terminology for you to look up later. And it could help you building out your narrative. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying it's not going to be one of your homework items. So that's the case. But personas, just as a heads up, actually will be one of your homework items for tonight. Okay, so the customer discovery process, hit the street. I mean, that's the quite biggest part of this thing is you have to get yourself out of your comfort zone. It's great when you have a team, so you can kind of encourage each other, but you cannot do this just sitting in your desk and talking to no one and hit any level of success without a tremendous amount of luck. So if you're in a team and someone is a little bit more extroverted, maybe they get the ball rolling with the customer interviews and the observation. And obviously today it's a little difficult to do a lot of customer research, but you can get people on the phone. You can get people on Zoom. Everyone knows how to use it now. You can kind of make your way through this without physically getting on the street, right? But in normal situations, this is what you do. And I have students ask me this all the time. I mean, they're like, do you expect me to go up and talk to a perfect stranger? I was like, well, I expect you to do it properly. Don't run up to them and accost them, but walking down Highland Avenue, a place that's near a college area, and saying that I'm doing a college project and do you have 30 seconds to answer one question? First of all, that's not difficult to say. Second of all, if they say no, they don't hate you. There's nothing personal. They just don't have the time for you. And if they say yes, you're off to the races. And you're going to get 30 seconds, you're probably going to get 60. If you get 60, you're going to get 120, and so on and so on and so forth. So every question you can ask, and maybe it's 3 questions. I have a very brief survey, 3 small questions. Usually takes 1 minute for you to answer. I would love your time. In fact, I have a gift card if you spend time to me. I mean, you can even use bribery, but then again, sometimes you condition your responses, so you have to be careful about that. All right. So the idea though is to get yourself out there. And I said, pick the extrovert. So everybody on the team always picks me to go out there first. As I've gotten older, I say, no, I'm not it, you're it. And because I'm really pushing my team to do as much as I do in this regard, because they are always pushing me in other ways. But my point being is that you won't be a successful entrepreneur over time until you've mastered the ability to get the gumption, the motivation, whatever you want to call it, the need to get out there and actually vet out your idea and get feedback. And to me, just understanding and getting an idea either further embedded in my head as a good one or completely out of my head as a bad one is the reason why I go out there and hit the street. So what you're doing is you're observing first, you're interacting second, you're providing information without actually leading people. A big thing for me is be kind. I mean, if someone says, no, damn it, I don't have 30 seconds, I got to get my kid, say, I understand completely. Thank you very much for your time. Take care, and walk away, right? Somebody else standing right beside you might be the nugget of gold you want to see. And just because of that positive interaction, they might give you 5 minutes, right? Don't be a Karen. I mean, I think that's the big thing here, right? So positive stimulus yields positive results mostly. So ask, and if there's any Karens online, I didn't mean that as a direct attack towards you. I know some very good Karens, but I've met more than a few that weren't. Anyway, so be kind, ask non-leading, open-ended questions. And how does that make you feel? Channel your inner therapist, document all your findings, follow paths of interest to validate or disprove your hypothesis. Remember, you're out there to try to prove it or disprove it. Ask the 5 whys. Here's the 3rd time it's mentioned in this deck alone. Keep asking those whys, not in an annoying 4-year-old fashion, but you want to keep peeling the onion and keep going until your hypothesis is fully proven or disproven, and keep going with an individual until they tell you they have to walk away. The more you're getting from them, the better off you're going to be. And what you're really doing, if I talk to somebody for 15, 20 minutes, I'm asking for their name and their number. And I'm also offering for them to be one of the first people I call when my product's available, and an alpha test and a beta test. What I'm doing, and there's another thing that we're not going to discuss here, but it's called crossing the chasm. I'm looking for those innovators and early adopters. I'm looking for those ones that are going to be the one that might buy my product, even though it's not fully polished and vetted out all the way, but they like having new technology. And if you get someone that you start talking to and they're very excited, and I call it the repitch, if they start repitching back to you your idea in different ways, then you know you've got them. You're going to want to talk to that person again further down the road. So these are out there about hitting the street. Okay, and the last part is rinse and repeat. Evaluate, refine, rinse and repeat. I mean, you need to take what you've learned, evolve your theories and hypotheses, hit the street again until you're confident that your assumptions have been fully challenged. You have no native bias that are in the way, or those ones that were your native bias are actually validated by others. You have more answers than questions, and your data set is statistically important to a certain extent that an informed decision on idea and its validity is in a high confidence, right? So I can say in a high confidence, 80% or better, that my idea resonated with 30% of a market, and 50% of that market actually said they'd buy this product for me today. All right. That's, to me, it's not a true statistical sampling, but it's enough of statistical importance, I suppose, to say these are the numbers that I can build upon. Okay. That was customers in a nutshell. I've got about 15 more minutes, or no, 23 more minutes till the hour and a half is up. So I'd like to move forward to the statement framing and talk about that, unless there's any questions. All right, great. All right, so typical solution statement format. It's pretty similar to a problem statement. For the target audience of you who need V, the new product W is a solution that will do X. Unlike alternative Y, our solution does Z, right? I mean, so, you know, when you're talking about different products in the market that you've seen come out over time, ones that, you know, a good example is Facebook and Snapchat, and how they're always competing each other on features. So they'll write statements like this and why they're better. They'll give alternatives, so on and so forth. You might have 2 competing products in the same space for wound care. I mean, your competitor, you were talking about a competitor right now with Sweet Bio, right? And they'll love hearing there's competition out there. It fuels their fire. I mean, love might be a strong word. Appreciate might be a better word. But the fact is that they're going to continue to evolve their solution to outdo your competitive solution, right? And they need to do that and write the statement in a fashion that makes it very easy to understand who their audience is, what they need, with what product, and how they're better than the marketplace because of these reasons. So a typical format is like this. So we're gonna go a little bit deeper though. So don't worry. I'm not gonna ask you to do a bunch of U, V, W, X, Y's, and Z's. All right, so for the solution statement framework, For the target audience, you have to state the target user, the market or customer by naming its role or characterizing its group. So going back to what we talked about around segmentations, types, and considerations, this is that first part of it, right? You have to identify, because this solution, this is not the open-ended statement that I heard in some of the problem statements, which is fine to end that out with the how. This is the statement that actually tells you in depth how and why and what it's going to provide. So first, identify the target market, then detail that target market in your solution statement at the beginning. Who, statement of the need or opportunity to describe what the target is trying to achieve or do while it's having the problem. Rather than state the problem directly, state the need your target audience will have the opportunity to meet. So again, don't rehash the problem here, not in any great detail at least. Start talking about how the solution is going to fix their problem. The name of the product or business is a solution or business category. Set the context for the solution by portraying the kind of product, solution, or new business venture. State the category the solution belongs to so the audience members understand its relevance and relationship to their needs. This is pretty important. You know, when Vimeo came out, they were, or I'm sorry, what was the other app? There's another app that came out after YouTube that was the kind of they said the Tumblr of this, right? Or the Uber for this. That's the one we've heard a lot over the last decade, right? We're the Uber for this. We're the gig environment for or the gig model for this. You know, those give context to a marketplace that people already understand, right? So when you're saying we're the Uber of this industry, we're not saying Uber is in my industry. What I'm saying is I'm going to provide a platform in my industry that's similar to the gig-based platform that Uber did and Airbnb did without owning any assets. When you talk to customers in today's world, and also especially investors and business partners, and you say we're the Uber of this, there's a lot of explanation that you don't have to do anymore. Right? So giving it this level of context of what industry it is, what segmentation it is, and even what it's similar to, but not like, right? It's similar to this, but it isn't this, okay? Is important to put in the solution statement too. It's not a must, but it does provide context. Provide some key benefits. Why, what's the compelling reasons for someone to utilize your product? You just talked about who and who's going to benefit from it, what the problem is, and the pain point. Now you need to talk about the benefits. So this is all value proposition right here. And then unlike my competitors, we do this better by doing this. And don't just say, because I'm smarter. Don't just say, well, it's intellectual property that I own. I'm telling you right now, and I'm sorry, and this is not to disparage anybody in the room. If any of the scientists and any of the people believe that they're the only people working on this solution right now, they're probably and most likely wrong. I mean, everyone has ideas all day long. I don't care who you are. If you have a problem, you have an idea. Well, I wish it did this, right? Everyone has said that to themselves before. That's an idea. Now, you never carried on with that idea. You never, became an entrepreneur, built a product, marketed it, so on and so forth. So that might separate you from someone who's an entrepreneur that found something and someone who just thinks of ideas. But ideas are plentiful. Execution is what sets you apart from your competitors. Intellectual property provides a moat around you, but we all know that intellectual property is finite. And when you get a patent, it doesn't last forever. I mean, we see this every single day. And just because you have a patent doesn't mean it's going to be challenged, and it doesn't mean you're not, it doesn't mean you're going to win the challenge either. We'll talk about patents in a couple of weeks, but that's just a protective moat, but it doesn't necessarily set you up so well and above your competition that you never have to worry about them. You always have to worry about your competition. But like we said earlier, that keeps a healthy marketplace when you have competition. Okay, then the last thing, our product statement of primary differentiation distinguishes and sell the solution besides the fact that it meets the most critical need, what other interesting or attractive features are included. So we're not going to go down every feature, but if there is some other things, and oh, by the way, it also provides, if there's that added benefit that we can do. Another example is a water filtration system that's being developed by Christian Brothers University in our engineering department using rice husks, right? So Riceland Rice, the largest manufacturer of rice in the world, produce rice husks as their, in their process of packaging their rice. I've simplified it quite extensively, but that's the byproduct. That byproduct is actually what is utilized by this other company to do hard metal filtration and toxic material filtration out of water. in areas where water is very scarce, or places like Flint, Michigan, and stuff like that. So you got a company that can also say, not only are we cleaning water, we're utilizing one of the largest byproducts that becomes waste from our major business partner, which is Riceland Rice, right? So you can make bold statements about your product and then even add a few benefits at the end. And in your problem statement, I think those are good, but don't lose sight, the forest of the trees. Don't say it does this, and this, and this, and this. This is not the place for you to kind of do the entire feature set. But if it does have a very compelling side benefit, it's a good place to list this too. But you want to first distinguish yourself by talking about the major benefits of your solution. Okay, I didn't go over extensively in the solution. we're gonna send this document out. I'm gonna send out and post up to the Google Drive some examples of solution statements. I knew I wasn't going to get into enough time to kind of dive very deep into those like I might want in other classes. But that's what office hours are for. So I'm going to put some stuff out there tomorrow morning and probably this evening, and then we can talk about it in more detail during office hours if you have questions about the solution statement. In this program, we're relying on y'all to do a lot of legwork and research on your own. It's very simple to go to Google and type in solution statement and get some good examples of what we've talked about here. Some of what we've talked about here, I got from my peers and colleagues and from the similar places you might find on the Google as well. So it's just a good way to describing it, and you can dive into this and start building out your solution statement. So your homework is this. If I had constructive criticism on your problem statement, I'd like you to make updates to that. And then as soon as your problem statement is ready to go, I'd like you to send it to Shelby and I, Ryan, and Erica at a minimum. Don't send it back to the whole team. Just send it back to the 4 of us. What I mean by the whole team, I mean the whole cohort. You can certainly send it to all the people on your team. So when you have a validated and what you believe is a good problem statement, send it my way so I can give you some critiques and suggestions, or just tell you, hey, you're spot on. So I want to see another evolution of your problem statement, unless I've said you're good to go. Then I want you to define and document your typical customer segments, considerations, and types. You don't have to go through extensive detail, but I do want you to take in consideration the considerations and types and tell me which ones most match up to the customers that you're trying to target and isolate. So take that in consideration around your typical customer. I want you to create one customer persona for your top high value target customer. So whether that's a young baby between the ages of 0 and 12 months or 15 months, whatever it is, or it's college students between the ages of 18 and 25, or it's individuals retired between the ages of 65 and 75, whatever it is, build me a customer persona of what your typical top high value target customer is or customer group. And then create a solution statement. So last week you had one thing to do. This week you have 3, if not 4 things to do. So I really want to challenge you with your team. If you're not geared into this thing right now, this is when you need to kick it into gear. As we progress week to week, we're going to have less and less time to go over these things and to refine these things. So last week, this week, next week, and then the week after, we really need to make sure that we're talking about everything we need to help with that idea discovery canvas and give you everything you need that you're going to dump into your pitch deck at the end of the sessions, so we can do a really high quality pitch to our panel at the end. That was it as far as content goes for me tonight. So I'm happy to open it up for questions or anything else we need to talk about for the last 10 or 12 minutes. Remember, come off mute if you're on mute.
Hey, Brian, it's
Hey,
Erica. Hey, everyone. I was gonna just say, if in this part can there be some clarification? Maybe you guys talked about this before in terms of customer. If we're gonna describe who our customer is this someone who's the paying customer, or do you want a customer persona based off of who's using the product? For instance,
Great
if
question.
it's a medical device or therapy or something like that.
That's a great question, Erica. Thank you very much for bringing that up. I think for the exercises that we're doing right now, given the time constraints we have and how much level of detail that we probably can't go into, let's pick the customer that's going to most benefit from utilizing your product or solution. So it's not the healthcare provider. It's not, if you're talking about a wound care or another product that's going to be sold through a third party or an insurance or a DME or something like that, we're not talking about them, right? What we're talking about is the infant wearing or laying on the mat, right? In this case, not the helmet. That's the old version, the laying on the mat, right? So that's the person that's going to most benefit from it. If, for example, though, if my child is able to rotate and keep that forming of their head in the fashion that I want my child to grow up to be in, I'm going to be extremely satisfied as a customer. But if it, but the person that I need to see the impact on is my small child, right? So I think that's what we should focus on, is actually who is going to be benefiting from it directly in the space. And if you have questions about that, you can ask me online or offline.
Hey, Brian, this is Corey from Shoutous Group. I have a question about the customer. So you talk about doing some survey to the customer, like, for example, like talk to them on the street.
Sure.
What if your potential customer are actually like business companies? How do you reach out to them?
I mean, it's a great question, and one that kind of makes me think of a lot of things and stuff. So if you're you still have to. A business doesn't have an opinion. I mean, is I guess the best way of putting it. But those that run the business have an opinion about their business. One way or another, you're going to have to talk to a human, right? You can do as much research as you possibly can when you're talking about another business or a competitive space. Obviously, you're not going to call your biggest competitor and, heaven forbid, pretend like you're a customer and find out information. But there are ways of finding people and businesses to understand what their business is doing and how your product stacks up with that, either as a competitor or as a service provider or solution provider. So if you're talking about another business, you're still going to have to do the research of actually what is going to make that business buy from you. Going back to my example earlier of the mass market, non-diversified kind of segmentation of SAP selling into FedEx, every SAP business leader that I know of that was worrying about FedEx talked to all the executives of FedEx to find out exactly what FedEx needed for SAP to provide in order for them to get a contract, right? So even though it was a business and you're talking about a major large customer, you still need to understand that customer has opinions and biases and makes assumptions, and you have to validate all those.
I see. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And today's, for this world that we're living, because you brought up something else, surveys are not a bad thing, right? They're not a great thing either. Surveys are never going to outperform the information that you're going to get from a direct question and answer session with a live person. The uptake on a survey is generally less than 10%, and the quality of information that you get of that 10% is usually 3 to 5%, especially if you have 7 or 8 or 9 questions. If you have 3 questions, all that changes. I like to utilize surveys as an additional tool on top of my customer interview process and customer discovery process. I also like to use it later on to fully validate things, so I'm not constantly going back and forth out into the market physically, literally, however you want to think about it. Or I'm not burning anybody by, hey, I know I just talked to you yesterday, but I got more questions. And then you call 3 days later and say, I know I just talked to you, but I got more questions. Some people, that's okay. Most people, you're going to turn them off and they're going to do things. But throwing a simple survey, so doing an interview and saying, hey, in a week, I'm going to send out a small survey for all the interviews that I have found, the information, just because I want to validate the top 3 components of the information I found. Would you mind filling out that survey? And then a week later, I send out a 3-question survey. And usually, because I've preconditioned it, I get a much higher uptake and I get much higher quality on the surveys.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and an alternative to surveys or something that you could do in conjunction with surveys that I found, if you're going after like a disease or like using the tummy time mat as an example, there's often social media groups like on Facebook where people will go in and talk about their problem and talk about what's missing in the market or what they wish they had or what solutions they've tried and how those worked. And that can be a great source of information without actually directly interacting with the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic idea, Ryan. I mean, before the age of, the internet, before the early 90s, you really were forced to put yourself really far out there to find information. These days, there's no shortage of information. In fact, there's no shortage of disinformation as well. So you need to make sure that you validate the validation, right? You need to not, and this is not to say anything wrong with what Ryan's saying. It's only to add to it. I think he's absolutely right. But you need to not, make sure that you just don't take that as gospel at that point. And make sure you're getting from reliable resources, other subject matter experts. That's what we talked about in the first week when we were going over the pitch deck. When you get to that end, when you're talking about team, you all have subject matter experts, your mentors on your things that are going to be very valuable resources to do things. And Larry, other individuals, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're still on the call. I mean, if you're going to sit there and tell me you make no assumptions and have no native biases, well, then you're probably wrong, because we all do, right? And so in order to get past those, we have to push past those. We have to do research. We have to talk to people that are smarter than us. And so talking to Larry and all these other individuals that have this idea about what they're doing, both, and take this for what it's worth, is listening to them for all the information that they have is very, very valuable. Understanding if they have validated that information and how, to the extent they validated that information, is also extremely valuable for them and you and their product. Then doing the legwork to do that for the product is really why we're here. The benefit to that not only can inform your marketing and your product and your go-to-market, it can also inform their science. And that's a big part of it too, is customer research can inform science, not just how to market, not just how to package, not just how to price, but physical science in this regard as well.
Yeah, that was very informative. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, we're gonna have office hours tomorrow from 4 to 6. Shelby's gonna send out the sign-up sheet again, and we actually have another individual that's going to be available as well, potentially. So we need to see if we're going to have people sign up for all of us, so we can make sure we spread those out. Again, you're losing out if you don't talk to us, only because we could possibly or probably help you with something you're struggling with. So reach out to us if you can. Send us information in email if you don't have time, or just don't prefer to be on a conference call. You got enough Zooms going on this week. And send me the information that we asked for in the homework. So I want to see updated problem statements from each team. And then I would like to not wait. In fact, let me make this a more of a declarative statement than a preference. Is I don't want to wait until next Thursday to go through personas, customer segmentation considerations, and solution statements. So if we can all agree to having your first passes to me by Tuesday of next week, end of day Tuesday, not close of business, end of day Tuesday, that way that gives me Wednesday, and Shelby and I Wednesday, to give you feedback. You can make iterations to that for Thursday, and then when we go into Thursday, we can feel pretty comfortable that I can only, at that point, I can just probably pull out a couple of examples of the 6 teams and say, okay, we're going to go over this team 1s and team 5s, and knowing that team 2, 3, and 4 and 6 are all on a similar fashion. So your homework actually does have a deadline, close of business. I'm sorry, end of day Tuesday. I'll give you end of day Wednesday back for me to give you information. So Thursday you can make those changes, so we can talk about them on Thursday evening next week. Okay, everybody, I think this was a great session. The questions that were asked were great. I thought all of them were spot on. They all garnered more conversation and more in-depth conversation and more information that I can provide you around these topic areas. It's hard to consume everything that we consume in an hour and a half. So if you have questions that you digest and you want to send off and fire off emails, please don't hesitate to do that. And then we'll just keep working together. We'll be available from 4 to 6 tomorrow evening. So sign up for the classes or the office hours if you need it. Other than that, we are at your disposal. And that goes for Erica and Ryan as well. I'm going to go ahead and say that for all 4 of us. We are your facilitators, and we're here to answer any questions that you might have. Remember, Eric and Ryan have gone through this, right? So they understand this process already pretty intimately. Okay, Aisha she just dropped out. She's coming back in right when I'm about to close everything. So I think that was a good session. It's recorded. I'll punt it up there on YouTube and send out all the information. We'll be putting stuff on the Google Drive soon. And I appreciate everyone's time.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.